like to welcome you all today to this special discussion that we're having with Bennett Miller, who is our special guest today. Bennett Miller is an Australian artist. As many of you, I think, are now aware, responsible for the ever-popular Dachshund UN performance installation. He was just finished wrapping up in Harbourfront of Toronto, and it's going to be moving on to Montreal in May. I'm not going to elaborate on that. I'm going to leave that for Bennett to talk about, and you can ask your questions. I think this is a great opportunity to talk to him about this work. I just want to say before I get started that we have a number of special guests with us as well. Joining us from Harbourfront is Skye Fairchild-Waller, who's joining us as the Artistic Associate. I need to get these titles just right. Artistic Associate. And Mila Volpe, who's joining us as well from Communications. Communications Specialist.
So if I'm deep into my iPhone, it's not because I'm not engaged. It's because I'm actually live tweeting this to the World Stage following. And if you guys want to kind of keep up to date with other World Stage contemporary performances that are part of our festival, then you can follow us on Twitter at WorldStageTO. And there's also brochures in the back for the rest of the season, so there's more exciting work to come.
You did it for me, yes. So please, on your way out, make sure that you pick up the brochure and find out about some of the other exciting things that are going on at Harbourfront. I feel this is a special occasion for us. One of the things, of course, that we're interested in dealing with here at the School of the Arts of McMaster is community outreach, and I think this is a wonderful opportunity to work collaboratively with Harbourfront to allow you this opportunity as well, and to allow the public at large this opportunity to meet and talk with an artist who is working on something that I think has captivated the public imagination. I won't go into details about Bennett's past as an artist, because I think he'll be addressing some of his works. In fact, you can see one right here behind me, the works that he's done in the past. So suffice to say, I'm going to hand it over to Bennett and let him do his talk right now and open the floor up for questions afterwards. So if you'll join me in welcoming Bennett to Bennett. I almost forgot to mention, of course, Slippers, our little dachshund here, who was in the Dachshund UN performance on Friday. So I'll sit down.
Very good job.
I'll hand it over to Bennett.
Hi everyone. Thanks for coming, and thank you so much for having me here. I'd like it to be more of a discussion than me sort of presenting. That's not my favourite thing to do. So I'll show you some of my images of previous works and go through some images from the Dachshund UN, and then we'll talk more about the specifics of that project. Which has just happened across the last 4 days at the N-Wave Theatre for World Stage. It's been a real thrill to do it over here in the theatre, and so this is a background work of mine. I did a series called The Gulf War, which was a mini golf course that retold the story of the war in Iraq. So the one that you're looking at right here is the very first one. And it's more of a natural scene. It has this seal embedded in, you can't quite tell, but that's actually a golf course. So over time, I would expand and update this course. So this is one of the later versions. The audience was invited to play, and all these different obstacles reference things that were happening in that conflict. So you can see it sort of has this cruciform shape at this stage of the project, and it sort of changes around what's happening in relation to this seal character, which was intended to represent Saddam Hussein. So it sort of moves through this cruciform shape to eventually end up as this Islamic pattern. And this was the final version of the work. You can see that the seal is no longer there, and it's almost unplayable. So you had to chip instead of putt from over there up to there, and the ball would nearly always get trapped. That's kind of a relevant project to the Dachshund UN, because the reputation of the United Nations suffered a lot during the Gulf War, when the Coalition of the Willing sort of went into Iraq in spite of opposition from the UN. So relevant in that way. This is the first project I ever did with a Dachshund, and it was actually for a children's festival, and it was this very sort of ridiculous illusion where we were pretending that this Dachshund, he owned that castle and he could recycle things. So people would come along to this mezzanine floor and drop rubbish in the top of the castle, and then they'd come down and we'd take the dog around to the back, and then new items would come out of the conveyor belt thing there. But I guess it's relevant because it's the first time with the Dachshund, and I was trying to match the colour of the dog to the environment and the sculpture behind it. That led on to this project, which is obviously very similar, but it was a topiary maze that took place outside the Supreme Court. Different dog this time, obviously, but a site-specific work, I guess, with that building as a backdrop. Yeah, so now we're into the early stages of the actual Dachshund UN. So I think this is a shot from in the studio when we were first building the sculpture. It first happened in 2010 with a very long development period throughout 2009. So it was for a festival, the Next Wave Festival, and it had a theme of no risk too great. So I was invited to be in that festival, and I came up with the idea of expanding the Dachshund work to have this corpus of the United Nations. So now we jump into the actual work. This is the first time it happened in Melbourne. It's in front of the Royal Exhibition Building, which is where Australia's first Parliament was. And yeah, there's quite a few of these, so I'll flip through and show you a wide shot of the whole thing. That dog's always been one of my favourites, and has this sort of perfect expression on every idea. Similarly with that one. The speaker dog, which we didn't actually have that in the last iteration of it, but it's a nice part of the project when it's outdoors. It's quite often the United States that produces these sorts of moments. This is when the show went to my hometown in Perth, so you might be able to tell it's a bit hotter, and I think it translated to some of the behaviour. This is in the UK at the Fierce Festival in Birmingham, which this work also travelled to. This is out the front of the Icon Gallery in Birmingham. This is when the project went to Sydney, outside the Museum of Contemporary Art, and unfortunately it rained. So yeah, but it did produce this shot, which I was quite like. And this is from Toronto. This is Yui, who's one of our favourite dogs, and this is one of my favourite images. So yeah, I'll keep going through the images and we'll talk more about the Dachshund UN later. This is a more recent work that I did for a show in Melbourne at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, and it's called Behavioural Ecology, and it's empty zoo enclosures based on the Berlin Zoo. So there's these two rooms there, and I sort of copied the aesthetic of this German modernist zoo and presented these empty enclosures. I think that's pretty much it. This is from a recent work which isn't finished yet. There's a video, black and white video, and it's all set in New York. And I'm taking the Woody Allen film Manhattan and using all of his establishing shots, but then replacing all the Woody Allen moments with moments like this dog or sort of random things. So yeah, that's it for that. We can probably turn the lights back on and we can show a live feed. Not a live feed, but a recording of the live feed from the performance that's just happened.
Is this Thursday then, Bennett?
Yeah, this is the opening night. So as you can see, it's quite a different work being in the theatre. The sculpture was actually rebuilt over here, and it's been made square to fit the theatre, obviously. And we have the logo in the background there. Does anyone have any questions about the work? Yep. Hi.
Why do you like to use dogs, and have you ever run into any problems with animal rights activists?
Well, firstly, I chose the Dachshund for this work in particular. I was trying to come up with a metaphor that would describe both the positive and negative aspects of the UN. So I chose the dog because it's got its sort of restricted form with the tiny legs. But so this, they're seeing the world from right down there, and it's hard for them to get about and achieve things. But nevertheless, they're very lovable and proud and quite determined creatures. So I was trying to match that to the idea of the UN, which I think is a very important and great organisation, but it has a lot of inherent challenges, such a difficult thing to pull off. I also chose them because of their racial diversity within the breed. So as you can see, you end up with this, because there's all these different types of Dachshunds that are still considered a Dachshund. Once you assemble the caucus, you end up with something that's quite similar to humanity. And I also was interested in their links to kind of nobility and warfare throughout history. So Queen Victoria had Dachshunds. Napoleon had Dachshunds that he named after himself. And there was a German war general, Erwin Rommel, who used to actually take Dachshunds into battle with him. And in more recent times, Rumsfeld had Dachshunds. So I was struck by this kind of absurdity of these quite violent, influential people being suckers for this really cute dog. I, in essence, copied that idea or repeated that. Another reason is I often work with animals, but more specifically with some sort of relationship between humans and animals. So in this instance, you have the pet, and if you think about the owners, which I believe you can see sort of through that gap there, being underneath there, you can think of the dog as kind of being a puppet of sorts, and that has links to how politicised the UN actually is. And there's probably more reasons, but I won't go into any more. In terms of opposition, yes, I have. I have had complaints. I've had, there was a sort of opinion piece written in the Melbourne paper when I first did it that was quite critical of the work. And it's definitely a huge concern of mine to make sure that it is as comfortable as it can be for the dogs. So we have substitute dogs, and as Greg could attest to, the owner is there monitoring sort of through that gap at the front to make sure the dogs are all okay.
I was going to ask, why did you choose to kind of make a critique on the UN specifically? And why do you, what kind of commentary is the work supposed to be on that, if it's supposed to be right?
Well, I think as distinct from the Gulf War, which really was a protest piece, this isn't intended to be critical of the UN. Obviously, I wanted to be both. So I was saying before, I wanted to try and describe the positive and negative aspects of the UN. So people are drawn to the idea, and it seems like it's critical, but I hope when they watch the actual work and appreciate the sort of beauty of the dogs and think about it a bit longer, it's not only read that way.
When you started your project, the dogs and the owners, do they travel with you, or do you get them from the center where you do your show? And how did you, not recruit them or cast them, I guess is probably a good way.
Yeah, well, that's been a really great part of the project, that process each time, and it has been different each time. The first time I did the work in Melbourne, I used to travel around, and it took about 18 months to meet all the owners and all the dogs. And I would have to try and describe what this thing might be, which was always a bit strange, and I wasn't that sure myself how we would do it. But now that it's happened, and there's proof that it works, we advertise for dogs in each location. So Sky could probably talk a little bit about that process, because he's actually done a lot of that on my behalf. And yeah, would you like to?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it depends probably on the location. So if you're in a smaller area, unlike Toronto, it would probably most of the, and we do use the word recruitment because that really is what it ends up being. Most of the dogs might come from a more centralized area, but because of course Toronto is so massive, and when we began the whole kind of recruitment push really in August, about a half a year before the production, it involved both like site visits. So we went to Wiener Palooza, which is an event that they have in Mississauga. There's things like Wolfstock, and like, you know, it's like serious. So we would like infiltrate these, you know, Wiener themed things and really just start talking to people about this new and exciting work, and the fact that World Stage was going to be hosting the North American premiere, and we wanted, you know, them to participate and show them, you know, examples like Bennett was saying about just how much fun it can be, and a wonderful kind of experience for dog owners and the dogs that they love to be able to do together. Most people, I'd say, the severe majority of people who participate have not been on stage before. Some even haven't been in a theater. So like this is a really great kind of learning experience for them. But when we did, you know, when we started doing the recruitment push for Toronto, like the interest was colossal. I mean, people were like really, really into it. So we had people drive like from 8 hours away in a camper van to like set up shot in a parking lot so that Fluffy could be on stage for 15 or 20 minutes, which is so heartwarming. Like talk about, you know, audience acquisition and contemporary performance. Like this is dreams come true for people who have a job like mine. But we even had people coming from Quebec. We had people coming from New York, like crossing borders in order to be able to do this performance project. So
you had a person from Venezuela, was it?
We had people from Venezuela and Puerto Rico who were like, is it coming here? And I was like, no, do you want to come here? But so at the end of the day, we ended up tabulating that of the 117 humans and dogs who participated in the project, they were coming from 24 cities across Ontario, Quebec, and New York. So it was really exciting.
I'm curious, back in the beginning, you had this idea in your head.
Yeah.
And you think it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
It's a little off the wall, though. How did you get people to back it, sell it? You know, you must have told them, here's my idea, and probably a number of people scratched their heads and said, what's wrong with you, or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you get it to take flight?
Well, that was that period I talked about. It took 18 months. It was a really slow sort of struggle to make it possible. The Next Wave Festival helped a lot in getting it off the ground, and the Melbourne Museum eventually supported with that great venue and the beautiful building. But really it was just a matter of deciding that it could be done, and then trying to talk to people who would want to be involved and building it slowly. And yeah, I'll probably never forget what that first process was like, but as Sky was saying, now it has really grown, and to me, it's probably more interesting than those initial ideas behind it, like what it's actually become and how many people are involved in it, and as it sort of continues to turn into more of a social sculpture than conceptual object.
Any more questions? Yeah, Sally?
Thinking about the conceptual object part, I kind of wonder if you could talk more about that. I totally relate to this sort of wonderful engagement, spectacle, cuteness part.
Yeah.
But then there's that zoo piece seems to be almost like an inverse of what this does. This gives you lots and lots of cute dogs to look at, and the zoo piece denies you an animal to look at.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could talk about your thinking in terms of the relationship
Between those two works?
Yeah.
Yeah, that work, they've both been shown in Melbourne. When I made that second work, I was very conscious of the fact that the audience would be disappointed in that way, in coming and expecting to see an animal and then not. But it's about a different topic, so I was, thinking about how we treat animals and how we treat ourselves. So there's some links with that zoo environment and actual home environments. So yeah, it is a much darker piece than this one.
Is there a dark side to this one?
I don't think so. But it's not only light and fluffy. So it depends on the level of engagement from the audience and what people take away from it. But it was really interesting to have it in a theatre, and I think that had kind of a different energy, and the audience could concentrate on it a lot more. So I think that, yeah, people do start to think about the situation more. I think the animals are useful in that way because we tend to appreciate the difference amongst the animals, and we don't always across cultures and with each other. So it could be, I think Greg said it was melancholic, but I don't think it's very dark.
Yeah, Brianna?
Just wondering, we're watching it without the sound, and I'm assuming that dogs were barking.
Yeah.
Was that part of it, or was that something that you wanted to put this feed now that there is no sound? Ideally, do you want the sound there, or do you like it without the sound? How does that, I could just imagine it would be a little bit chaotic if the sound would add to it, or do you think it distracted from it?
I think it's important that there's sound in the live performance. We've just got to turn it down now for the purposes of the talk, really.
Actually, to that, can I also add that there's another aspect too, which generally people don't seem to connect with, and that's the smell.
Yeah.
And I read about this in one of the reviews, and I thought, this was before actually participating, and I thought this is interesting, and sure enough, it's true. By the end of the performance, there is a distinct dachshund smell that sort of goes through the air, and you think of the noise, you think of the audience reaction, but there's that other aspect too, the olfactory aspect of it too, which is really quite important.
Yeah, it was worse than ever before.
It can be quite pungent.
Having it indoors, that was a challenge. But no, definitely, it's meant to be. The idea is meant to be able to survive however the dogs behave, and it's kind of this open, live metaphor. And essentially, it's just a dog behind a nameplate, and depending on the behaviour of that dog, that will draw out what people think about that country. So yeah, all of their behaviour, including the noise and smells and whatever might happen, is okay by me.
Bennett, I was going to ask you something about because so much of this is also about community. It's hard to explain what makes. I have to count myself amongst the people who do this. What makes you respond to something like this and say, I really want to drive through hell or high water to get to this thing, so I can put my dog up on this, to be part of this event, and that that seems to me a really interesting thing in the first place. What makes somebody get into a camper van and drive 8 hours to come to Toronto to do this? But there's another aspect as well, having participated in it, when you're on the other side, all the people who are under there right now with their dogs, there's something that I wasn't, logically you can understand it, but you just don't think about it at the time until you're in the situation, and that is the disconnection between you and the audience on the other side, with the dogs in between. Once you put your dog up on the platform, your dog is sort of separated from you. Like he was stuffing his snout down every so often, but the rest of the time he's up there and you don't really see him. It's hard to see him. And you can hear the audience responding to the actions of the dogs, but you don't know what's really going on up there. You can only see the audience a little bit through the cracks. So you're disconnected from them and you're disconnected from the dogs in this particular way. There's sort of a half connection, because you know they're responding to what's going on, but you're on the opposite side, just sort of monitoring things. And I wondered if you had sort of given some thought to this, or if you see this as a really relevant aspect of it, what the audience doesn't see, and that's all the stuff behind the scenes, and what it's like for the people on the opposite side with the dogs in between and the audience. Do you see that as relevant or meaningful?
I do now, but I don't think I can see of how that actually was properly when I was first developing it. But now, I mean, I've been astounded at and obviously very grateful, but with the response to the project, and the willingness and the sort of desire from people to be involved. And I think it's makes the project a lot more interesting the more that community is built up. And it's it's like a microcosm of what the UN is like in theory. So I pay attention to it now, but I'm not sure that. I think at first I just wanted it to be possible to establish this thing.
Yeah.
Of course.
Just to touch a little bit on that is, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia. This is definitely an opening night production. Tina Rasmussen, who's the artistic director of World Stage and the curator of all of the work that World Stage presents, one of the really interesting things that she said to me when she called me into her office when I was first finding out that I was going to be assigned to this project was that one of the reasons that she was really motivated to have this work be put into a theater was not only because it was February and March in Toronto and it would be torturous to ask dog owners and dogs to be outside, but because the actual mechanisms of the work are just as potent, poetic, and kind of like insightful as the actual product. It's the whole kind of like process product attribution of value. And so when we had this, you can't really see it necessarily from the web, from this recording, but the theater has 3 floors in it. And on the second and third floors, there's a balcony that actually kind of wraps all the way around it. So more often than not, people really were drawn to kind of like walk as far as they could to see these mechanisms happening, to see these, dozens and dozens of people dressed in black with treats, interacting with these dogs, and that it's not necessarily just the image at the end of the day, but it's not just the dogs on this wooden thing, it's the process of meeting those people, knowing the dogs' names, getting them to Toronto 4 months in advance. It's that whole kind of like experiential, immersive connection that I think runs a parallel to the actual dynamics that happen when the performance, when the installation is taking place.
Yeah.
There's a lot happening.
Sorry?
I have a question and a request.
Okay.
My request first is if you guys could speak up a little bit, because we're kind of tucked in the back corner here, and with some of us around the edge, it's hard to hear, particularly Bennett and Professor Davies.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you, Sally. I've been practicing for you.
Yeah, much louder.
Actually, Greg, I had a question for your daughters, if that's okay.
Sure, yes. Yeah.
Can I ask, I know you were there, hey, when Slippers was up. What was it like watching? Were you worried for him, or did you only watch him, or did you watch other dogs too, or what was it like?
It was sort of like mixed emotions because at times you could see him, but at other times he was hidden behind the sign.
Oh.
You couldn't really see him. And at first I was getting pretty nervous just because I thought he would growl or bark at the other dogs. He'd start whimpering and running off.
Were you worried for him, or did you think he was going to be fine?
Well, I thought he would be fine since there were people under there, but I was also worried for other dogs since some were kind of teetering on the edge a little. So I was like, they're not gonna fall, they have an owner and a leash, but the audience was gasping. They yeah.
Great, thank you.
What's the, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go
What's the
ahead.
camera operator given any instructions? Because the camera operator is a big part of the piece.
Well, yeah, this is a new thing, having the webcast. That probably wasn't the best moment just before. So that's a little bit unfortunate. But no, there weren't specific instructions. I've filmed it before, and I just filmed the whole thing and keep the camera in one place. But this is a little bit different. We're zooming in on moments. But I think it's an interesting record of the work, but it's not the same as viewing it live, obviously.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask you, when you recruited these pups or these dogs, did you ask the owner which country they wanted to be as, or did you assign it? And if you did ask the owner, what was who picked which country, or how many people picked the same country, and was it different in different areas that you did the shows in?
It's random. And it's kind of an important part of the idea for me that they aren't assigned to countries, but there are always requests to be a certain country. And in the Sydney version, we put Palestine in. If somebody requested to be Palestine, and I kind of liked that idea, so we tried that. I think Sky had somebody requesting to be Chile, was it? And so it does come up, but yeah, it's important that it's random. Yes.
So, we have another question over here. Bennett, we have another question over here.
When you were showing the pictures earlier, and you had that dog that was, I don't know, growling or yawning with his teeth out, and you said something about how America is usually the aggressor, and it's sort of the behavior translates through the dog. And even now, watching them, sometimes they'll do certain thing where I'm like almost stereotyping that country through what's happening in politics and everything else. Were you kind of hoping that might happen, where people will make that connection between the behavior of the dogs to a certain country?
Well, I should clarify that it's completely a fluke when that happens.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So every time that's happened I was saying that happens a lot with the United States, but it's kind of an active thing with the audience. So it's important to me that the audience is making those judgments based on a nameplate and the random behaviour of the dog, but it's never choreographed in any way.
I just want to point out, this is one of the disabled dogs that we had involved. Arthur was born without eyes. And he's playing Jordan right now.
Actually, on that note, this issue of performance also seems to be an interesting aspect of it. The naturalness of dogs as performers, which I think was actually the subject of one of the write-ups in the papers, which I thought was really quite interesting to also think about it in terms of performance and performance art. How relevant is that aspect, do you think, also to the work? The fact that the dogs, the behavior, there is this risk management aspect of the behavior of the dogs, because you never know what they're going to do. Even this fellow here, we didn't know what he was going to do until we got there. The behavior is perfectly natural, and it seems to trigger a response from the audience. If you think about the audience as players in the performance too, it's completely unrehearsed as well. The laughter, the talking amongst each other, the decision to stay or to walk out, seems to sort of mimic in some ways the aspects of the dog performance, which is also completely natural. And
Yeah.
is that important in your view, or?
Yeah, that's something that's become, it's really interesting to me now. And I've moved from, you would have seen the static taxidermised animals at the beginning earlier in my work, and then I went through a period where I was trying to make robotic ones, and eventually arrived at using these live animal performers.
Yeah.
And I think they're a really sort of powerful material in that way, and you can think about the whole of their actions.
Mm.
So I think it's what drives the piece.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure.
So I think you're talking about J. Kelly Nestruck's piece in the Globe and Mail.
Yes, yeah.
So I heard when him and Tina Rasmussen were talking, and in that article he does talk about how one of the things, and this is kind of like an age-old theatrical idiom, which is that one of the things that theater artists and makers are always told never to do is to never work with babies, never work with animals, and the reason is because they will steal the show no matter what. Part of that allure and what makes them so intoxicating from an audience's perspective is they are the only two specimens that truly lack the ability to be self-aware. And for fully grown adults, and we don't have the ability to regress and lose that kind of cognizance, or to lose that sensitivity to our actions and our performances in our everyday lives. That is totally intoxicating. It's mesmeric to be like a witness to a baby on a floor or an adorable puppy in a lap. Like, you just kind of like hone in. And so while I think certainly to me, that's what one of the things I found so remarkable talking to these theater and dance critics is that they came out of the installation going, I could not I could not look away. You just can't. And that's one of the things that while the audience, what they're offering in terms of laughter, in terms of response, in terms of agency, is certainly complementary. They are coming from a different place, and that they are utterly ridden with self-awareness. And they are making choices based on that kind of like fundamental.
Very interesting. Any further questions?
You're going to Montreal next with this?
Yes.
Do you have to translate all the countries?
I'm not sure. We haven't discussed that yet. There will be someone speaking on my behalf, which is probably a good thing. And in French, whenever we're talking about the word. I don't know if we have to change the nameplates. I haven't thought of that.
Are there any further questions for Bennett?
It sort of has something irrelevant to this. It's about your first piece, the Gulf War, the seal. You said that seal represented Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
Why is that? I can't make a connection because I'm not really politically inclined, so.
Yeah, well, it's very obscure. It was in my head, but because he had seal has blubber and has oil, so I just decided that this character was Saddam. It was never explicit in the work. It's just that you could tell, you could draw these different conclusions based on what happened to that seal, and eventually it disappeared from the work. So it is a very obscure link, that one.
Can I just ask you also about that, because it's one of the things that I've been wondering about with your work. There seems to be this underlying thread in not all the works, but many of them, this play on witticisms and sort of the humor. There's a serial comic aspect to your work.
Yeah.
It's dealing with comical aspects, but serious issues underneath the surface, which actually belongs to a long-standing tradition in art. How important is it to you to communicate with your audience that you do it through this element of humor? How important is humor in delivering the message or connecting with the audience in the way that you want to connect? Is it an important aspect?
Yeah, very, very. It's a strategy, really, to draw people into the work and to draw people into those ideas. Mm-hmm. And I feel that it, in a way, it mimics how people do respond to these situations. Mm. So, how people will respond to the UN, or even with that Gulf wall.
Right.
It's actually quite sort of cursory how people deal with these meaty issues. So I like there to be humour and novelty as a starting point, and I want to sort of find an audience. But then I hope that once they consider the whole of the work, that it's not only that. But certainly I don't think that this work that I would be able to have this work travel as far as it if it wasn't engaging in those.
Yeah.
So it's quite deliberate.
But the reason why I'm asking is because my particular area of interest is caricature and the history of caricature, so I'm quite accustomed to dealing with this. But also because with comical works, with a comical element of the work, you can address an audience in a way that you simply cannot do with a work that is taken seriously from the start, or takes itself seriously. And I think that's sort of what I'm asking, and I think you've answered that question more or less, that this type of work allows you to engage, to reach that audience in a way that if this was in some way, I'm not sure how, but if it was able to present itself as taking itself more seriously, that it wouldn't connect with that audience. But based on the response you've had so far, which is really quite astounding, I mean, you've reached over 1 million Twitter accounts.
1 million impressions, yeah.
1 million impressions with this, and your attendance at the theater over the course of 4 days is continually getting expanded. You had over 600.
I think the production in total had 2,000 audience members.
Over the course of a 1 hour performance each day.
Yeah.
It's quite extraordinary, really, and it just seems to continue growing. I think without that comical element, it probably wouldn't be able to reach that audience in that way.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
That's something I'm very aware of. Yeah, in producing this.
Yeah. Are there further questions that people have, or I certainly don't want to be. Yeah.
This is sort of a logistical question. By my count, you don't have all the member nations of the UN. Do you change the member nations representatives periodically?
Yeah, it's actually the Human Rights Council that it's based on, which is, but we don't have all the members of that either. That's a 47-member sort of subsection of the UN.
Yeah.
So I haven't been brave enough to tackle the General Assembly. 192. Countries rotate through 3-year tenures in the Human Rights Council. So we take these countries from the current membership of that.
Yeah. Sally, is that a...
Why do people line up to participate?
Well,
we were talking about this over lunch. I don't know. It's a curious question. You know, what is it about little wiener dogs that makes people get so giddy and kind of lose themselves? And having been a participant in the back with.
That's what I mean. Why do people want to bring their dog?
Yeah.
I think because they love them. And I think when you love something, I think you want to share it with maybe as many people as you can. But I think that's what I feel like that's what I've witnessed.
But to add to that, though, I think it's also that it creates a kind of comfort zone. You know, when you're with people who are there because they're there because it's something they love, they want to be there. There's no pretense. You know, in the back behind this, with all the other Dachshund owners present, all mooning over each other's dogs and, you know, asking, you know, so and so and how old is your dog, et cetera, et cetera. There's no pretense. Everybody forgets their professional position in society. There's no sense of looking at each other and competing socially. There's no need to put on airs or to pretend to be anybody other than who you are. It's a great equalizer. And it's really all about everybody with these dogs, and we all love them. And that's why they're there. And we know everybody in the audience is there for the same reason. And I think that's one of the sort of extraordinary things about it. When you were talking about, is it Wienerpalooza? Is it in Mississauga, which I know about, and having met with other dog owners out there, that's what happens when you get people together in these situations. It becomes about the dog, and they kind of forget themselves a little bit during that moment. And it's a very comforting thing. It feels very relaxed and natural. And I think even briefly for that moment, people kind of crave that, or they want to have that. It's the glue that helps bring people together, creates a sense of community. that's my reading of it, and sort of the experience at this event, which makes it so extraordinary.
Yeah. From my perspective, it's I don't know is the answer, because it's different for everyone that's involved. But that certainly is true what you're talking about with the community that exists among Dachshund owners. There are a lot of events already that are like this, where people will gather together. So sharing the love of the dog is definitely a driving thing. But it has always surprised me that people, or increasingly it surprises me that people are quite keen to be involved, and we almost have too many a lot of the time.
Are the motivations for their participation important, or is it irrelevant?
They're not. It's not crucial to me, but it is. It is something I like about the work, that community. I prefer that people enjoyed the experience of being involved than not. Yeah, but it's not something that I think of as part of the concept.
And I think, to go back to Sally's point before, just one other little thing to add. I mean, we know about these puppy rooms that are being created on campuses for students experiencing undue stress. There's been some work with this. And I think that sort of relates to the same thing you're talking about this lunch as well, the puppy rooms. You know, on campus during examination time, when students are experiencing undue stress, what is it that they get out of the experience of going into a room where they have puppies, which they've tested on various universities. In fact, I think they may have even done it here, if I'm correct on this. It's a great stress reliever, certainly, but what it is that relieves that stress precisely, I'm not sure, but I think if you were to talk to somebody in psychology, they would probably have some answers for that. But part of it also is the fact that the dogs themselves also don't provide any judgment. You know, they're just natural. They are who they are. So I suspect that has something to do with it too.
I think that's part of this work. This is critical, a kind of critical piece in here that I feel like I'm not quite articulating. Where there's something about that. The dog. Maybe it came up a bit in that Globe article. I mean, the dogs are. Ben, I think you did say it. Lonnie's getting at it too. Like they're just doing dog things, and as the audience, we're reading all this stuff into their behavior.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I guess I'm kind of curious, like, how important is the UN to that dynamic? Like, could it be something else? Like,
well,
and it relates to the zoo project too, right? It's like it's like we're looking. It's something about the looking at animals. We're animals looking at other animals. Seems like that's something very central in what you're doing.
Yeah, that's something that comes up a lot in my work, and I guess I'd like to break that down a bit, how important the difference is in a really broad way. For this work, it's very important that it's the UN, because I want the audience to be thinking about their perception of the UN and their perception of other humans. So you use the dog as the method to get people thinking in that way. But certainly there could be more direct works about that sort of human and animal thing, and I think the zoo work was more direct in that way, and specifically about that. Yep.
Has there been any response from the UN to this work?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Do they know of it, or?
Yeah, again, I don't really know, but somebody in the UN would be aware of it existing, I'm sure, but I've never been contacted. And I don't want to get in trouble for altering the logo.
One funny thing that happened, I think it was on the Saturday performance, is the former Governor General Adrienne Clarkson came with her husband. And she remarked to Mila, I think, on her way, and she was like, you know, I've been to the real thing. Let's see how the dogs do.
Sorry.
How do you coordinate this organizationally? Presumably these dogs are going with you to Quebec, so how do you get the next group of dogs?
We put a call out in every city that it travels to, and recruit new dogs each time. So Sky was talking before about that. He's been critical for that, and have sort of led that recruitment drive. But we do it anew each time.
So you have coordinators in each area that know who to contact and how to publicize it?
Yeah, well, it changes over time. The first time it was just me, and it was a much longer process, but now it's more streamlined, and people know the work. Dachshund enthusiasts quite often know the work. So we just advertise that we are looking for Dachshunds, and then we meet with the owners. It's always important to meet or talk one-on-one so we can get across the idea of what it will actually be like as an experience and the safety concerns and so forth. So you build up a relationship or series of relationships that make the work possible, but it happens anew in each location.
And I think as the work, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but as the work continues to be presented, certainly at World Stage, and now that it's going to Festival Transatlantique, like these are huge, huge performance festivals that thankfully have the ability to dedicate like a staff complement to this type of organizational logistics, because it's quite colossal. So to have that kind of support in order to be able to just know 117 Dachshund owners, let alone to get them to drive from Timbuk wherever to, you know, participate in performance is really, I think, really great. I can't believe you did this by yourself.
Yeah, but it was a very, very slow process, and I'm not sure I would do it again. So, I've been very lucky in that way. Sky's right, and I'm grateful for that. And there's a lot of help with this project each time, and it's a huge team that makes the project possible, including the dogs and all the people that work on it, and all the owners. And yeah, that's been something which has been really, really great with this project, and a real sort of joy for me to have that be possible again and again.
Any last questions? Okay, well, I'm going to stand up. Just take a second to thank you all for coming today and spending some time to talk to Bennett Miller. I hope you found this a rewarding experience. Slippers. On your way out, there are some brochures also for upcoming Harbourfront events. Maybe worth taking the time to look at that. Those of you who are interested in the puppet project that was starting to develop here, there is in fact a very interesting experimental puppet performance that's coming up at Harbourfront that you might be interested in knowing about as well. Again, if you'd join me in thanking Bennett for joining us today. And the